Okay, let's try a little thought experiment. When I say ancient Persia, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, right, it's probably something straight out of the movies. You know, this huge, faceless, totally tyrannical empire.
Yeah, exactly like that. We're constantly shown this image of a monolithic, aggressive force. I love this quote here, calling them some kind of first-order level big bad. And you know where that comes from, right? It's movies like 300 that have really cemented this idea of the Persians as the ultimate bad guys in the story of Western civilization.
But is that the whole story? Oh, it's not even close. The reality of ancient Persia is so much more complex and, frankly, way more impressive than that tired old stereotype.
So you gotta ask, where did this whole evil empire idea even start? Well, it mostly comes down to one source, their biggest rivals, the ancient Greeks. Think about it. The Greco-Persian Wars gave us this epic story of freedom versus tyranny, and that narrative has been incredibly powerful, sticking around for more than 2,000 years. The only problem? It's a super one-sided story. To really get what Persia was all about, we have to go way back to the beginning, back to the founder of the very first Persian Empire. That's the Achaemenid Empire. And his name was Cyrus the Great. And let me tell you, his way of building an empire was, well, it was something nobody had ever seen before. And this really breaks it down perfectly. On the one hand, you have your typical empire builder from that time. They conquer, they oppress, they demand loyalty. Standard stuff. But then you have Cyrus. He basically took that playbook and threw it out the window. When he went up against the powerful Median Empire, he made a promise to their nobles. He told them, your people will be treated as total equals. And you know what? He actually did it. He forgave his enemies and brought them into his new empire as partners.
I mean, this way of thinking, this benevolence it was wild for the time. Take Babylon, for example. He conquered one of the greatest cities in the world without a fight. Then he does something even more incredible. He frees the Jewish people who were being held captive there and even helps pay for them to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. Nobody did that. It was unheard of. And his reputation for being both smart and merciful just exploded. There's that famous story about King Croesus, the super rich king of Lydia. The oracle at Delphi tells him that if he attacks Persia, a great empire will fall. So he attacks, and, well, the oracle was right. It was his empire that fell. Okay, so after Cyrus, things get a little shaky. His son, Cambyses, has a really short and pretty disastrous reign. Let's just say he did not inherit his dad's kind streak. So after him, a guy named Darius I comes to power, and he's got a huge job on his hands. He has to take this enormous, sprawling empire that Cyrus built and somehow turn it into a stable, organized country that actually works. And how did he do it? With an absolutely brilliant system. At the top, you've got the great king, the king of kings. He's the boss. But, and this is the clever part, he delegates power to local governors. They were called satraps. And these guys were often picked from the local nobility of the places they were governing. So you have local leaders running local affairs, all connected by amazing infrastructure, like the famous Royal Road, and a super efficient postal system. The whole thing allowed this massive, diverse empire to run like a well-oiled machine, all while sticking to that core principle of tolerance that Cyrus started.
So let's go back to that oppressive empire stereotype for a second. The truth is, for most people living in the Achaemenid Empire, life was pretty good. We have tons of evidence showing they had a fair justice system, they welcomed different cultures, they even had state-promoted education. And get this, women's rights were incredibly progressive for the time. It was a thriving, peaceful place to live. But of course, that's not the end of the story. The Achaemenid Empire was really just chapter 1. The history of Persia covers more than 1,000 years, full of invasions, new dynasties, and all kinds of challenges. So, what happened next? All right, here's a quick rundown of the big shifts. First, you have the Achaemenids, founded by Cyrus. Then, boom, Alexander the Great comes in and conquers everything. After he's gone, the Parthians eventually rise up and take back the Persian lands. They're in charge for a few centuries, and then they get overthrown by the Sasanids. The Sasanids create the last great Persian empire before the Islamic conquest changes everything. Now, the Parthians and the Sasanids were like night and day. The Parthians ran a more decentralized show. They were a huge hub for trade between East and West, and they fought Rome to a draw for centuries. And they loved Greek culture. Their kings called themselves Philhellenes, which literally means lovers of Greece. The Sassanids, though, totally different vibe.
They centralized all the power and made a huge push to revive a distinct Persian identity. They made Zoroastrianism the state religion and managed to score some big wins against a Roman Empire that was starting to show some cracks.
But this whole pro-Persia focus, it had a dark side. With a strengthened aristocracy and a powerful religious establishment, things got tough for anyone who wasn't a Zoroastrian. There was persecution. It was a huge step backwards, really a complete reversal of the tolerance and openness that made Cyrus's empire so great in the first place. Things didn't stay that way forever, though. The Sasanids did eventually start to rediscover what made them so successful. After a pretty long stretch of weak leaders and fighting among themselves, a new ruler came along who really seemed to get it. He understood the original Persian ideal.
This was Khosrow I, probably the most famous of all the Sassanid rulers. And why is he so celebrated? It's pretty simple, actually. He was basically a modern-day Cyrus. He took power away from the snooty clergy and nobles, brought in a system of skilled bureaucrats to run the government, and most importantly, he brought back that core idea of justice for everyone.
And really, this is the whole point, isn't it? The Sasanids had been trying so hard to bring back the old glory by doubling down on being Persian, but they'd missed the secret ingredient. The Achaemenid Empire's success was never about ethnicity. It was about being good. It was about being just and fair and open. That was the magic formula Cyrus figured out all those centuries before. In the end, after long, draining wars with the Byzantine Empire, the Sassanid Empire was weakened, and it eventually fell to the Arab invasions. But, and this is a huge but, Persia's influence was nowhere near finished. In fact, its incredibly rich culture, its art, its science, its way of running things became the absolute heart of the Islamic Golden Age that came next.
So the story of Persia is just this incredible reminder that history is so often written by the winners, or, at least by one side of the conflict. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? What other stories from history have we only ever heard from the rival's point of view? Who else have we turned into a villain just because we've never bothered to hear their side of the story?